Welcome to my review of Rollergames for the NES. This is a lesser known game by Konami. It doesn't get too much mention, but it's actually quite a good game. I remember owning this when I was younger, and I was able to get pretty far, but it got brutally difficult for me at the time, so I got stuck, on one part and I couldn't get past it. And then I actually revisited the game years later on emulation, and I ended up, just for the fuck of it to see the game, I ended up cheating through the game with save and load states. And, I didn't count it as a legit, game beaten on my games beaten list, but I did get to see the game that way, and it seemed brutally difficult, even with save and load states. It seemed really, really fucking hard. But at that time, I didn't really embrace the idea of practicing with save and load states to, learn the entire game section by section really efficiently and then putting the whole thing together. So it wasn't until, years later that I revisited the game and actually practiced the section and learned the game and then put all the stages together legit and beat it. And I have a tutorial up, which I'll post the link in the description so you can check that out. That breaks everything down. You have different characters that you can pick, and I remember there were some differences with the characters. I think this fat guy is the slowest fucking guy, but I think he does better damage with his strikes, but I don't remember the exact differences. I'm sure I covered that in the tutorial, but I beat this several years ago. But I think certain characters were better for certain parts from what I remember. At least for my playstyle, I found certain characters were, made certain sections easier. But yeah, it was cool to put this game together, section by section. You do have unlimited continues. And when you lose your lives, I believe, even if you lose a life, I think you have to start back at the last checkpoint. But I'm not sure exactly how the checkpoint system works, when you go out to the continue screen. I don't know if it sends you farther back than if you just lose a life. I don't really remember some of the smaller details. But you have your basic punching attack, and you have a power attack you can use too, but I think that wastes that little bottom right meter with the three little icons. It's like a little meter, and I think that wastes when you do your special moves. So you can't abuse them, but I believe they do a lot of damage from what I remember. But this is a really unique game in that it mixes obstacle navigation, dodging obstacles with actual, combat, which is really cool. I didn't really see this style, done back then, not too often, so I thought this was a unique game that would be worth covering. And at the end of each stage, you usually have a boss fight. So you'll see after beating this guy, you have to fight the guy with the cane up at the top will come down, and you'll have to fight him. And I show most of this first stage, if not the entire stage in the review, just to show how the game generally progresses, because this is really how most of the levels play out, just in different environments with, different obstacles. But that's pretty much the pacing of the game. It's obstacle navigation with combat mixed in, so it's pretty cool. And the different characters give you some, incentive to experiment with the different characters and see how they handle on certain stages. And I'm sure I go into all the details of that in the tutorial, the differences between all the characters. But it's just been a while since I played this. But luckily you do have unlimited continues, and if you're using save and load state to practice efficiently, you can just practice parts that may give you trouble ahead of time and then, commit suicide or just go back to the beginning of that section and do it legit. It's a much better way to play the game than the way I played it in the past on the system, not being able to practice sections efficiently. And the game really wasn't as hard as I remembered it being. I think it only took me a few hours to beat when I returned to it. But in the past, it was way too difficult for me at certain points, I didn't know what to do. But, having that mentality of breaking games down section by section and really trying to master each section has really opened up these games for me and allowed me to beat, hundreds of old games, compared to in the past where, I had a very low number of games completed back in the NES and the 16-bit days when I was in my teens and before and prior to that, obviously. But yeah, you can see this is an auto-scrolling level, so occasionally you get some of these auto-scrolling type of stages. And for those, you can't play as carefully. You just have to be ready to dodge shit since the screen automatically scrolls. So you'll just have to learn, the best positioning and get used to all the obstacles coming up, learn to dodge. This part's very easy. You just jump when the explosion hits the bottom of the screen, which I cover in the tutorial. That's how I always play this guy. It's very easy if you just stay at the bottom and wait for that bottom explosion and then jump. So some of the bosses are a little easy to exploit, but I mean, there was always that, and pretty much all NES games had bosses that were, very easy to exploit. There is one bullshit part at the end of one of these auto-scrollers that's really not clear how to do. I think there is a way to do it without damage that I saw in another video, but when I was playing, I never figured out how to do that. So the way I did it was very basically just taking damage kind of style, because I knew I would be able to beat it that way. Sometimes you have these slopes, and this game is really momentum based, which is interesting for an NES game. Not a lot of NES games really tried to toy with momentum too much. And in this game, depending how much speed you've gathered, you can sometimes get up hills, or if you're going down a hill, you'll speed up and have to manage that momentum. So it's cool how actually momentum was used with the obstacles and with the gameplay. You don't really see that too much. I mean, games like Marble Madness did that kind of thing, but it wasn't real common. And that's pretty much the style of most of the game. It's just that the obstacles get more difficult and the stages get more difficult as things go on. But the game has a real nice pacing to it, and it's always interesting. The obstacles are always cool. There's always it's always an enjoyable game to learn. Each stage. These slopes are kind of cool because as you're moving through, you have to try to manage that horizontal momentum and not fall into the water on these little slopes right here. And of course, you don't want to get hit by the fire, so you have to manage all that with the momentum, and you have to really be in control of all that, which is really cool. You can at least take some damage. You have a health bar, so it's not one-hit deaths. And the game is pretty good with checkpoints. So you may have to practice, later on in the game especially, you may have to practice a lot of the sections so that you have everything down, but it won't take that long for you to get to the next checkpoint as long as you've learned everything, that you've practiced. Some parts can take a decent amount of practice to get down, but it's not anything that's going to give experienced players too much trouble that are experienced with these type of games. But yeah, it can definitely be very difficult for, it just really depends on the skill level of the player, but it's kind of a moderate game, maybe upper moderate for an NES game. Not quite what I would call a hard game, but that's going to vary. It's probably more on the level of Contra for NES type of difficulty, on the standard default lives. In this game, you have unlimited continues, but the stages are a lot harder than something in Contra. Even though Contra has limited continues and lives, this probably has harder stages, but it's unlimited continues, so you never really get set that far back. The boss for this stage is kind of bullshitty in this auto-scroller level, where it's really not clear how to avoid, taking damage from these barrels that come out of the back of the truck. So, I mean, I felt like that was kind of a shitty design. I don't really like the design of that boss. It does feel cheap. Most of the game, doesn't feel cheap, but this particular boss felt cheap to me. There is actually a good way to dodge this part without taking damage, though, I believe. I just, whenever the truck would get real close to the left side of the screen, I would always take the hit. I never understood how to dodge that. It's probably something simple. I think you may have to just go more to the right, the right edge of the screen. I think it was something simple that I was overlooking. But it did feel kind of bullshitty to me, at the time. But, maybe that was just me. I probably should have just moved to the right. I didn't practice this boss too much. The way I figured it is as long as I could just, take enough damage to get through the stage and still survive, That's all I was going for. I wasn't trying to refine any sections for a tutorial or anything. I was just trying to complete the game. And then I just added commentary later for the tutorial version. But yeah, the game is really well paced. I mean, the levels usually play out in a similar way. It mixes and matches, which parts are obstacles and how long you're going to be dodging obstacles for, things like that. Sometimes you have more side-scrolling type areas like this. And this can be a little tricky. Definitely takes a little practice. But you have some parts that are kind of side-scrolling where you can't move up and down too much because you're on a very narrow surface. Most of the time you have to manage up and down movement as well as left and right. That's how most of the stages are. And aside from that, you maybe have, 2 auto-scroller stages that just scroll automatically. So there's a decent variety. But the gameplay remains pretty consistent. But, it's well-paced. It keeps it interesting. You see there's different things going on where you're dodging these fish now. As you go through different parts of the environment, you have different events occurring. These parts can be a little tricky with these rafts. And then as you get farther into the game, you see things get more and more difficult. Now you have the conveyor belts to manage along with these spikes. So that kind of changes the control up when you land on those conveyor belts. You got to be ready to fight against whatever direction the conveyor belt is moving in. And they switch up frequently, so you got to be ready for that. You have some of your double dragon style moves here where you can, hair grab and kick the enemy in the face. Jump kicks. You see me using a little bit more variety in my attacks here. But you don't have a lot of attacks. That you have a few standard moves, which is really all you need, But the beat 'em up mechanics are not complex. It's like simple beat 'em up type of gameplay. The main feature that stands out about the game is all the obstacle navigation, which is really cool, and the momentum-based gameplay really stands out. I think those are some of the features that really make the game stand out above a lot of other games, as something unique. This part can be a little tricky as well with all these conveyor belts and flames. You can see how you would definitely want to practice these sections with save and load states just to make sure you have them down so you don't have to restart the area again. It's good to try to learn it. The fat guy has a slow startup speed, so sometimes getting his fucking ass going can get you hit. But it's a nice variety. I mean, they use the momentum mechanics really well. Like, sometimes you're fighting uphill like this long. There's a lot of variety in how you have to use the momentum and deal with, various hills and obstacles. It does keep it fresh. It definitely tests your skill at managing that momentum, based control. So this is the final boss area. And you can see in editing I switched to this character. I don't know if this is a male or a female character. I mean, these graphics are not great. But this character, I think, worked better for me on the final boss for whatever reason. I'm sure I cover why in the tutorial. I just don't remember. But the final boss is really nothing special. It's another humanoid kind of character, the same size as you. You're not going to be fighting any fucking mythical beast or anything in this fucking game. You just fight human characters. Well, maybe that's not a fucking human. I don't know what the fuck that is, but, it's about the same size as your character, whatever the fuck it's supposed to be. But, I think this fight felt more cheap than anything. I think I just had to play it, in kind of a cheap way by waiting for a certain opening and then jump kicking it, but I think it was kind of cheap. I don't remember this being a well-balanced or fair feeling type of final boss fight. I remember it being pretty cheap. It's kind of hard to know when you're going to be exchanging hits with the boss. Are you going to land the hit, or are you going to be getting hit as you're trying to hit the boss? It's kind of hard. There's not a clear opening from what I remember. So I thought the design was kind of weak. You know, I didn't think it was really that good of a boss fight. It felt kind of cheap. You know, it's also kind of a stupid-looking final boss. It's really nothing too special. But the game, I thought this game was quite good. I really enjoyed it. I thought it had really good pacing. And it's definitely a unique game that definitely gets overlooked, you know. Game is now over, so that's all you're going to fucking get. But yeah, I'd give this game a 7.5 out of 10. I think this is a good, solid game. I wouldn't put it in that great category, which would be an 8 and above for me, because it's just not on that level of something like Ninja Gaiden for the NES, which, you know, I believe those are some of the best games on the NES, and that's like a top tier for me. So I would put this a little bit lower than that, but I still think it's a really good game worth playing. Thanks for watching.